I'll link the video in description. The Russian language version has been released, and so we can, just from the images, I can break that down enough, even though I can't translate into Russian. The video title, again, Google Translate, but the artifact that has been fooled by us for 100 years, pseudoscience spotlight. This has all to do with Core 7 and the alleged apparent spiral, which is simply not a spiral, not even, it's really is a load of bunk, and those promoting it should be able to just see it by their own photos that they produce. So Core 7 is the holy grail of this particular argument in regards to granite drilling and cores, and the constant feed rate, or the unbroken constant spiral which is in there. Does it exist? No, it does not exist. An example like a helical spiral of a helix, like a double helix or a spiral staircase, that's what it looks like. That's what you'll hear constantly proclaimed by these, the unbroken constant spiral. It's just not there. But let's look at that video where they got some clips of the people promoting this, and let's hear what they say.
Just some of the hardest materials on Earth.
Except that they're conic and they feature grooves that so far nobody has explained or reproduced.
It had a spiral groove.
A spiral groove that goes around core number 7.
Each groove means that the penetration rate was likely 2 to 3 millimeters per revolution.
That is an impossible feed rate.
It seemed like a rough, ready process to pop a hole in granite as fast as you can.
That the penetration rate is 500 times more efficient than a 21st century drill.
This really is the elephant in the room when it comes to evidence for ancient high technology.
The technology is far more advanced than what we have. Lots of evidence of lost ancient high technology.
The evidence for the high technology.
And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology.
As of 2020, the lost ancient high technology industry still promotes this idea of a spiral, but what have these team done? Well, they visited the Petrie Museum and they took high resolution photos of Core 7. They were able to map these all together and to look at the striation patterns, and more so compare them to the ones that I've done. I've replicated their experiments and I've got the same results as well. That's science. Multiple independent experiments have produced the same results. The modern reconstruction using the illustrated ancient tools compared to the ancient artifacts are producing the same spirals, the same deep grooves, and as you see here, they've mapped it out, and it is clearly evident that this is not a constant feed rate, and it is not a spiral. It is just a fact. And we'll look actually at the pictures of Christopher Dunn and Eric Wilson, who are used to sell this absolute nonsense, it's absolute nonsense, and we'll look at their own pictures just to show that. Very seen illustration of, we'll get a better one because it's got to do with fluvial abrasion. The experiments that they've done and then I replicated, I used the lubricated method. When I drilled with my tube, I used a hard abrasive, granite will cut granite, but the technique is to use water, or the lubricated method. Both in the videos but in the comment section circulating around the lost high technology industry is this continuous groove spiral that these experiments, you're not addressing these features or whatever. I'm an engineer, I'm a stonemason, I'm all these things, and it's impossible to do. I've seen it in other threads, I've seen it on my own videos, and it is not just the fringe in the comment section, it is actually repeated from the lost high technology industry videos themselves, and we can trace the source of this river back to Christopher Dunn, because whether it's Brian Foster, Uncharted X, all these other channels, they're always referring to the expertise of Christopher Dunn. And in his own site, so you see there on the left wall, here I am with a sighting tool and microscope. It's all very, very sciencey. Here I am wrapping a thread around Core 7, which proves it's a continuous spiral groove. And well, even the latex impression, which was put away and then emerged. He brought it out years later and analysed it, and not a. If that's the best you've got, okay, but it's no. But even the latex impression itself and the photos of his thread being wrapped around debunk the arguments that they present. So Alexander Sokoloff, a scientist against Smith channel. Well, here we see one of their cores that they've drilled, and well, you can wrap a thread around it because the appearance of a spiral with scarcely an interruption, and scarcely interruption is Petrie's own words. Here's one of the cores that I've drilled using that exact same technique, and I can find a thread and wrap it through with scarcely an interruption through there, and it has been done using the primitive technique of a flywheel drill, the wet abrasive method, multiple independent times. You can repeat these. I post not just I post how-to videos so you can do this for yourself. It's a very cheap, very simple, very easy experiment to be conducted, and the lost ancient high technology industry have not done one experiment. You can also see, we'll see how the lines cross over, just like in the Core 7 image promoted by Christopher Dunn and then promoted by the lost high technology industry. All of the features have been repeated, the tapering, all of them, and the method. All of the signatures, which they say are signatures of lost high technology, are actually signatures of primitive tools itself. So for instance, there you see the wobble of the drill, which creates the taper, the lubricated abrasive method, which creates those striations. It absolutely has been done, and it's finished at this point. Okay, so Alexander Sokoloff and his team, hats off to Rob to helping them assist to get to the Petrie Museum and take these high resolution photos from all angles. They were then able to map this out together and create the striation pattern. We can observe that more closely here. The party's over in regards to this sense now. Not that it wasn't before, but they compare theirs to Core 7. I've done similar, and I've achieved all the tapering, all the other features which are said to be impossible, therefore lost high technology. Absolutely done and dusted. It has been replicated, where we see comparison of on the left a modern replica, on the right an old one, and then they've taken that map and well mapped it out, and we can see that this constant feed rate, continuous unbroken spiral is just not there, and that is evident from Christopher Dunn and these other photos as well. It's bleeding obvious that it's not there, but it's been confirmed. And let's have a little look further. This illustration comes from Christopher Dunn's own website. We'll link all that in the description as well. This notion of a constant feed rate and this spiral, and every aspect of it is pure bunk. They've never done an experiment to confirm this. In their videos they say, but it hasn't been repeated. But so there we see course. So it's very evidently not constant. You can just map out those groups, even just with Christopher Dunn's photos. That's evident as well. So here we see other exact. It's not constant. It's not any way precise or anything. We're even close to that. It's remarkable that this is being said, and we'll look at this closer in a moment. But every point that they've brung up, whether it's a tapering, polished surface, the constant feed rate, unbroken grooves, all of that, it is patently, obviously, just not true, and it is actually not true, evidently from their own photographs. But there we see. So what's happened is they have taken high-res photos. They've mapped that out. They've compared it to their own, and it's the same. Then we just look at all the grooves and the patterns of the striations. It's just evidently not this constant feed rate spiral. Nowhere close to it, and it's chaotic. Is what it is. But let's look at Christopher Dunn and Eric Wilson's own photos on this before we go any further. This is from a previous upload on my channel, and let's just have a look, because this is all based on the lost high technology industry actual evidence that they present. This is not what the Alexander Sokoloff channel, and that's presented. So evidence for lost higher technology, core 7 being the, the hill which they're prepared to die on. Is it a helix spiral? Is it a constant feed rate? Or a constant helix? Well, so whether it's a spiral staircase or the double helix of DNA. But you can also see that they use that evidence of a screw, or you could think of it as a spring, but the helix with that's a helix with constant dimensions. So core 7, there we see here and it's just a good example of like very well in focus, the gloves, but the core 7's like way out of focus. It's this, all of a sudden camera work just goes out the door when it comes to this type of evidence as well, which I think is very telling. But the thread going around there, again, this is directly from Christopher Dunn's website, which his chapter from his book on the core, and Petrie said he got 4 spirals around, and yeah, we can get 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5 around here, and over here we can get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, well, 8, getting up to 8 spirals. So if it was this constant feed rate with the spiral, the string should just fall into place. It should be, there would be no, sometimes I can get 4, sometimes I can get 8, sometimes I get much more, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. But let's first just zoom in on those, focus in on those, and so they always reference Petrie in these things as well. Not Lucas, not these other people, and certainly not the people who have actually taken time to do experiments and replicate them in their videos. Uncharted X is notorious for this. Oh, it hasn't been replicated, but he won't show you this information because it's this information which he's presenting is very carefully editing, not allowing his followers to see what's actually happening in here, because they have a vested interest in profiteering from bunkum tour guides. Now they accuse others of vested interest, but yet they do not have they got money's involved in this. They want to make a profession out of it. But this is actually Christopher Dunn's own photos. Petrie, in one part, a groove can be traced with scarcely an interruption for a length of 4 turns. Scarcely is another word, is a vague word for what one person calls frequent, another person might call scarcely. It doesn't now scarcely an interruption means there are interruptions. So you could rephrase that: in one part a groove can be traced with interruptions for a length of 4 turns, which in other words means that it's not 4 turns because there are interruptions in there. Helical spiral, not constant feed rate, not even close. Let's just zoom in on that. Again, that's Christopher Dunn's illustration, and again, whether it's comment sections in the video themselves, constant feed rate, helical spiral. So we just take a ruler and look. That's anything but constant feed rate. That's the opposite of constant feed rate. It's definitely not precision, and it's not evidence of lost high technology machinery, because the primitive tools depicted by the Egyptians themselves and all the other evidence that goes with it, that's in the archaeological record. The Science Against Smith have done it. I've replicated their experiments. Anyone else can replicate it. I'm willing to post these. I show you how to do it for yourself. You can repeat these very cheaply, very easily, and you'll be a billion steps ahead of a lost high technology community, because they have done 0 experiments. The one by Christopher Dunn I showed in an earlier episode was faked. He had only a taper of 1 millimeter over 5 centimeters. Physically impossible to do this. He faked it. He put it onto a machine. That's fraud. There's a hoax, which can be fun. I love a good hoax, but when you are deceptive for the purposes of profit, that's a fraud. And the one experiment done in this whole area over all these years, over all the millions of dollars and hours of travel and video editing, it is faked. It's a fraud. And so it's just not a spiral. Let's zoom in on that, and again we compare it. It's very easy to gauge. It is chaotic. It's nowhere close to a constant feed rate. Same thing over here. It's like evident. The people who promote this, like, how can you not know this and still sort of present this argument? precision advanced machinery. Seriously, this has got to be a troll. This has got to be a hoax on the part of it. They're having a lark, because to call this what they say it is just not even close. So we take that, we gauge it against the Christopher Dunn's illustration, constant feed rate helical spiral. I use those as the one, and so it's just not. It's just not, and no one can deny this. And if they are, they're just deluding themselves at this point. Now, just trace out those grooves again. They're all over the place, just the same as my drill cores and these other drill cores that have been done. This is from Christopher Dunn's page. He links to Eric Wilson's research. Now, Christopher Dunn could only get sometimes 5, sometimes 8. Well, let's look at what now they were able to trace out this spiral. Well, what's actually this is their own photography. You can find here are the links to their sites. Take a closer look at that, just to highlight it a little bit. Now, what we're finding is that they're also missing grooves. So to get this thread in place, they need to miss points. Now that's not the only one, and again, even you trace those, the lines are helter-skelter, they're all over the place. You'll notice that the thread crosses over itself. This by definition excludes it being a spiral, because if it crosses over itself, it's not a spiral anymore. It's a random bunch of lines that have been replicated by them and by myself, and you can do this easily at home by yourself. Again, I do long videos showing you how to do this. I go through all the steps, cheap, easy experiments, and none have been done by Brian Foster, Uncharted X, all these other channels. Zero, but they want you to pay money for them to point at stones and tell you obvious falsehoods. This is how they promote Christopher Dunn's book and his website. And did they not even look at it? Like, where does this come? This is bunk. Let's take a look at this other photo. You can sort of get an idea of a knot in the. But so again, the spiral crosses over itself. Not only is it chaotic in the distance between them, and if it was this unbroken spiral, the thread should just wrap around. You wouldn't even have to think it. You just follow the groove, follow it all the way around. Yet different people can find different amounts of spirals on different points. This is not a spiral. There's just no, this is a lovely cartoon illustration, but it's not a spiral. It's not a constant feed rate. I don't need to rely on the recent work by Alexander Sokoloff and his team. I just use Christopher Dunn's own photography. Did no one check this? Did they, like, again, you can see, so even again, that thread, it crosses over itself, and it's all at not only at different lengths between the spirals, they're all at different angles. It's just not, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement to make, and it's an untenable position to hold, and then to charge people good money for this. And to say, oh, but it's being covered up, and they've done this and no one, and people don't acknowledge it, because they know about the Scientists Against Smith channel videos. They know about the videos that I've done, and Uncharted X especially. And then he accuses others of vested interest and ignoring things because it's bunk. It is pure bunk. It's shameful what they do. Now again, just like the Scientists Against Smith channel, you just take, these were existing photos, not the high-res recent ones. These are existing photos, been on the internet for years. Just trace the lines on them. It's obviously and evidently not. And again, anyone promoting this after, have done zero research and are just telling fictions, frauds, fantasies, whatever you want to call it. F is a good word to begin, the fiction, fraud, fantasy, because that's what it is. It is a fantasy. Tapering of the cores. Okay, I shouldn't. Anyway, so we'll get into that. But my own sort of drill cores, and you'll notice that they just trace out the clearest lines there. And what do we get? We get. I can say, oh well, mine's a constant spiral. It's there it is. It's a it's a screw line, but no, it isn't. We get the same things going on here. Okay. All right, so there you go, and we'll do a little bit more, but it's also why these deeper grooves happen. It's fluvial abrasion. It's it's no mystery at all. The tapering is clear evidence of a primitive technique. Multiple independent experiments that anyone can do. If they spent 2 hours sitting down and actually working with granite rather than pointing at granite and saying impossible, they would learn a hell of a lot. But again, then their things go out the window. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit more examples of these, but it's busted completely. This is over with, and if they continue going on with this, then they're frauds, because they know it's not true, and then they have to censor this information from their viewers and still ask for money. In this video, they also, well, we get an animation to show you what's happening. So as the tube drills down, it's not the copper that drills, it's the sand. And even not just fine sand particles. The trick to getting the grooves is to use larger particles, larger grit size. And you see as the grit starts revolving around, they get embedded in the copper and pushed, not just embedded, but pushed against the copper tube, and they create these grooves. It's fluvial abrasion. In regards to fluvial abrasion, this paper published in 1983, which is unironically used and cited by the lost high technology industry as evidence in their favour. Well, I should actually read it, but now one of the important features is here. Now I'll link this paper as well, but functional analysis, where they describe the process there. You can also see the grooves, the striations in the imagery with their close-ups. But again, lost ancient high technologists actually say this and cite this paper and say, well, look at these don't look anything like Core 7, and well, rightly so, because these were drilled with modern technology. So you have Core 7 with those grooves, and then they say, well, that doesn't look anything like them. Well, if they actually read the paper, so back to functional analysis, firstly they described the abrasives they were using was 60 to 90 grit and 240 grit. So that's a very fine grit to be using. So of course you're not going to get the deep striations that are in there, and that has to do with fluvial abrasion. We'll show that in a moment, but the important feature is drilling was effected at a constant rotational speed of 1000 RPM and held intermittently at a relatively constant pressure. Well, 1000 RPM is not achieved by any hand tool. It's only achieved, this is a 1980s drill press. So the only way, these were done with modern tech. So the actual paper was looking at the type of marks left by different abrasives, but these were drilled by a modern tool. So of course a modern tool is not going to look like a Core 7, which was drilled with a primitive hand tool. Multiple independent reconstructions have obviously shown this. It's dead in the water at the moment. They're flogging a dead horse, as we say, in regards to this argument. So, but even the evidence they cite is just like, did they not read the paper? And but what an important feature in this paper, they talk about the difference between dry drilling, so just for instance, is putting sand in there and just drilling with the copper tube, as with that famous Dennis Stocks experiment, versus lubricated, so using either water or oil. And they quite clearly come to the conclusion that the lubricated or the wet method, which will be an important feature, creates these different striations. It's all there in the paper. I'll link it in the description. Fixed abrasives or those in a watery, slurry or lubricant such as olive oil did produce concentric cutting lines. Now, concentric cutting lines, we'll examine that and just review the experimental data. But for instance, when this Russian teams drill, I followed their example and I drilled the same, and so I would use a wet method, and the abrasive eventually wears down. The granite itself is being worn out and creates a mud, but there's a big, so that's the I'm using water and it creates different striations. Here's an example of what you can see what happens when you use that method. You get the grooves and we'll see, and as well the appearance of a spiral. This was not cut at that constant feed rate spoke, but this was done the old-fashioned method. That's how I did it. The Russians got the same. I repeated their experiments. I get the same results. That's the nature of science. Multiple independent experiments get the same results. This is finished with. So here's their drill video, and you can see that they're using the same method, and they're applying water. So of course they get a different. Also, that's how they get their striations. The lost ancient high technology industry Uncharted X especially, just like keeps throwing the Dennis Stocks experiment as if that's the only one out there, very carefully not including this in the description or any sort of links at all, because once this gets out, their whole narrative falls down. And also the flywheel drill and how it rotates, I'll show you an example of that in a moment. Again, they got the straight, they got the tapering, the cores, partial polishing in between the grooves, all of the features that are said to be evidence of lost high technology, absolutely repeated multiple times by them and multiple times later by me. So again, that's just science. Multiple independent experiments get the same results, proven. If you don't do any experiments, you can't say anything. So, but the question is sort of what causes these grooves, and there's that demo we just saw, it's fluvial abrasion. This is an example of fluvial erosion, so from the top, but we can find, that's another example. So just as the water runs down the flat sand, eventually it'll carve out a little channel. That channel will get deeper and deeper and deeper. So those grooves formed like this type of erosion. Water erosion is the same what's happening in the drill, but we can also see it in stone, not just in sand. So whether it's canyons where you see these lines and these grooves cut just by the flood. This takes a long time because you don't have a flood every day, and unlike the drill, it's not rotating at a few hundred RPM, but it's just an acceleration of what's happening there. Another example is in these potholes that you'll find, especially at the beach, where the whirlpool, just the sand and as the waves crash over, it creates a whirlpool. It just keeps drilling down, and you get these grooves. That's fluvial erosion or fluvial abrasion. Same thing, it's what's happening with these drill experiments. Here's another example you have in these canyons where a flash flood comes through, it's washing down rocks and sand, and they just continually cut away. One little tiny microscopic groove gets a little bit bigger than the one above and beneath it. It allows larger grit to pass through, and so these grooves grow and grow, even though it's a single strata of rock. Here's another example, and we can like all over the world. It wasn't a giant stone did not come down and cut this in one groove and then one at the other time, as that it has to be a fixed tool. No, this is nature's full of these examples. It's same thing that's happening on the drills. But compare a cutaway, and again I'll link all these papers. You can even see the grooves cut in there and the way that it channels down. It's exactly the same things happening. Again, their experiments, everyone who does the experiments and is willing to put them up, they don't take very long. They're very cheap to do. Again, you'll see those grooves just keeps getting repeated. Again, as we saw on the smaller scale on the 1983 paper, the Russian experiments, my repetition of their experiments, just the same thing. So that's fluvial abrasion. As the grit gets in there, the larger particles start cutting out a larger and larger groove, and as the drill's spinning around at several hundred RPM for a few hours, it just accelerates what happens here in nature. So that's done. So again, you can compare those potholes at beaches, and the same with those experiments. So again, that's just sorted. So that's why that illustration. Now we'll go to the next little course. I can wrap a string around and find the grooves in my cores. They were not created by a fixed bit drilling at that constant feed rate, and the scientists against me can do the same, because core 7 is evidence of the ancient technique depicted by the Egyptians, the tapering, the polishing, the grooves, etc. There's the same core, and I've now just got chalk to highlight where the grooves are. You'll see that it's the same pattern that can be found in core 7 and these other cores as well. And if we look at, so I'll get a still photo of that and focus on one particular part, and we just need to trace out the group, just where the chalk fails to highlight it, that's where the grooves are, and what pattern do we get. And then we compare that. Now I'll just darken it a little bit so you can see that pattern, but we come back to Alexander Sokoloff and his team and what they've done by actually high resolution of core 7 from all the angles. They are able to map this together and create give us the truth of core 7. And so there we can just flatten it out, and there we get all the grooves. We don't have to rely on on Christopher Dunn techniques, comparison of replica versus Core 7. And again, it's showing all those highlights. We compare Core 7 to one of their examples, and we see we're getting the same things going on in there as well. And they've just highlighted, traced out all the lines. You can see but they're all over the place. Some are concentric, some are up, some are down, some are sideways, some are at different angles. And just compare that to the core that I've highlighted here, and this is not the only one, but compare that pattern to what they've found on Core 7, and we see all the same features with all the, mostly let's concentric, but also going all over the place. The same thing can be found on all my other cores that I've drilled in granite using just abrasive and a copper tube and the flywheel technique, the taper. Again, all the features are repeated. Every experiment's getting us the same results, the same impossible to repeat features. It's not just, this is an older photo, I've done more cores since then, but they all show the same pattern. That's the basis of science. Now here's a picture of one of the tubes, the copper tubes that I've used, and I've just put it against a square to see how the copper wears at a specific angle, because when you drill with that flywheel technique, it's like pedaling a bike. There's a part of the pedal cycle where the most energy is pushed into it. So when you're drilling with a flywheel drill, when the handle is closest to you, that's where you're kicking in the most energy. And so here's an example of me drilling. So firstly you see that wobble, which will inevitably give you the taper, but that wobble back and forth is also creating that particular angles that you can see cut in those core samples that I've shown. And it's when the drill is closest to me that I'm again kicking in the most energy. That's an important feature. And the angle of the tube, that's where the bias is. It's where that energy is kicking in. So it's not equal force all the way down, and it will, all of my tubes, I've had the same thing happening. They get cut down to an angle. So in this photo you can see a close-up of the tube and how the cutting edge becomes angled because of this bias in the drill. And here's just like an illustration of what's happening. So in the center, if you cannot hold a top heavy hand operated drill straight, it's going to wobble. That creates the taper. That also creates this other pattern. Now for instance, there you can see the drill in operation and how that wobble happens. Now it's not always even perfectly in there. The wobble is, within those angles, it's unstable as well, unstable. And that's another important feature because that describes the pattern. So as we see here, sometimes you'll wobble it this way, and sometimes it's not going to be perfect all the time, and the lines are going to be chaotic and they're going to overlap. It's fluvial abrasion is happening, and this pattern is the one that multiple independent experiments we're getting the same results as well, and so that's why you see this pattern on all of the cores that I've created. It's one or the other, whether it's red granite, black granite, grey granite, and you can also see it in the core hole itself. So this part is over on Core 7, but they will still be selling this, and they're still going to censor these experiments, these information. They won't do the experiments for themselves because they have a vested interest. Lost ancient high technology industry is a scam.